Good. It seems everyone has been admitted now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kinga Bloch, and I am very happy to welcome you all in the name of the Leo Baeck Institute London to our lecture series, Popular Culture, Politics and Jews. And like you all, I'm greatly looking forward to Professor Moshe Zimmermann's lecture tonight. Before I go into greater detail about tonight's event, let me give you some technical advice to those who might not be yet so very familiar with online events on Zoom. To set up your screen for the best possible access to our lecture, please select full screen view and activate the mode Active Speaker Video. To do so, click on the top bar frame in your Zoom window. There you will see 3 icons, and please select the one in the middle. You also have the option to adjust the size of the speaker window by pulling the bottom left corner of the speaker frame up and down, as you can see indicated by the arrow in the slide. Please note that these changes will only affect your view and nobody else's, so whatever you do on your end is not going to cause any kerfuffle with the lecture tonight. So, the LBI London lecture series is organized jointly by the Leo Baeck Institute London and the German Historical Institute. And it is always a great honor and an incredible pleasure for us to work with the GHI. And I'm very happy to let Dr. Markus Möslang extend his welcome on behalf of the GHI to you now. So over to you, Markus.
Thank you, Kinga. Good evening from me as well. I want to welcome you on behalf of the German Historical Institute London, and thank you for joining us tonight. Christina von Hodenberg, our director, unfortunately can't be here, but she sends her best wishes, and we are very much looking forward to seeing you all back at the Institute very soon. My special thanks, of course, go to Kinga and her team for coming up with this wonderful series on popular culture, which the GHI London has again the privilege of co-hosting. And tonight's event, I think, will be a particular highlight, not only because of the intriguing topic, but of course because of the speaker. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Professor Zimmermann, to this lecture series. Thank you very much for speaking to us tonight, and I'm really looking forward to what you are going to tell us about Ephraim Kishon, whom I encountered first, I think, as a schoolboy, maybe quite tellingly in an official textbook at a Bavarian secondary school. But I don't want to take up more of your time, and I hand back to you, Kinga, so you can move on without further delay. Thank you.
Many thanks, Markus, for your kind words, and also many thanks to the team at the German Historical Institute. As you know, we're always very much looking forward to all joint events with you, and it is, as ever, a great pleasure. So now, let me now give a brief introduction to the topic of our lecture series and, of course, to tonight's speaker, Professor Moshe Zimmermann. This year's lecture series is dedicated to the topic Popular Culture, Politics and Jews. Delves into the rich world of German Jewish and European Jewish popular culture, examining its manifold manifestations, political questions, and also its complex motivations in history. Understanding popular culture's normative stance on societal issues grants access to images, ideas, and attitudes that have resonated with the breadth of society. Due to their popularity and their mass appeal, comedy and humorous publications in Germany after the Holocaust undoubtedly pose a complex and a very challenging issue to any observer. Or to say it in the words of tonight's speaker, Professor Moshe Zimmermann, improvising on Adorno's dictum writing poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, one might consider writing humor in the German language after Auschwitz is a contradiction in terms. I am very honored to welcome Professor Moshe Zimmermann on behalf of the Leo Baeck Institute London tonight, who will explore some of the complex political and moral questions inherent to humor in post-war Germany in a talk about one of the most popular humorists in the Federal Republic of Germany, the Israeli author and Holocaust survivor, Ephraim Kishon. I don't think I exaggerate in saying that Professor Moshe Zimmermann is one of the most renowned scholars in the study of German Jewish history. It is indeed very hard to boil down his remarkable career and his diverse portfolio of academic publications into a few short opening words. So please forgive me, Moshe, and please forgive me, dear guests, if I can only scratch the surface here. Professor Moshe Zimmermann is Professor Emeritus for German History, and for over 2 decades, from 1986 till 2012, he was director of the Richard Köbner Center for German History at the Hebrew University, Jerusalem. He was also visiting professor, inspiring students in many places in Germany, such as Mainz, Munich, and Göttingen, as well as at Princeton University in the United States of America and Krakow in Poland. Moshe Zimmermann has won numerous academic prizes for his work, such as the Humboldt-Forschungspreis in 1993, the Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm Prize of the DAAD in 1997, and the Lessing Prize of the Lessing Akademie Wolfenbüttel in 2006. And that is, of course, just to name a few. Professor Zimmermann is also involved with the curriculum planning of the Ministry of Education. Moshe Zimmermann's academic work includes German, English, and Hebrew publications about nationalism, anti-Semitism, the history of sport, film history, and German Jewish history, as well as books about the Holocaust, collective memory in Germany and Israel, and German-Israeli relations. I'll try to keep it quite brief, so I will only give 3 recent examples from his diverse portfolio of publications now. The first one is Germans Against Germans, The Fate of the Jews 1938 to 1945, that was published by Indiana University Press in English in 2022. It tells the story of how Germans declared war against other Germans, that is, against German Jews. And here Moshe Zimmermann explores how such a radical process of exclusion could take place in a civilized modern society. The second book I would like to mention is currently only available in German, called Vom Rhein an den Jordan, Die deutschen Quellen Israels, which I translated into From Rhine to Jordan, the German Sources of Israel, that was published in Göttingen in 2016. This book engages with the impact of the German Jewish minority's values and traditions on Israeli society. And finally, let me mention an article in English that is titled, What is the Holocaust?, published in Holocaust Studies, a Journal of Culture and History in 2014. I could, of course, continue speaking about Moshe Zimmermann's exciting research for hours, but that is not why you joined us today, is it? So I'm very happy to hand over the stage to Moshe himself now, who will speak about Post-Holocaust German Jewish Symbiosis, Ephraim Kishon, and the Germans. So, Moshe, over to you now. I'm very much looking forward to your talk, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk, especially this kind of a talk about a topic I'm not used to talk about. Ephraim Kishon is something which I know for already more than 60 years, since my youth, but it did not belong to the topics I am used to talk about in my professional work. So this is the opportunity, and I thank you very much. Ezra ben Gershon, a very Hebrew name, was born, he was called Joel König, in Germany in the year 1922, exactly 100 years ago. His autobiography that first appeared in German in the year 1967, Aufzeichnung eines Überlebenden, Records of a Survivor, tells a fascinating story of a Jew who went into hiding in Berlin when he was 19 years old, managed to flee to Budapest, then to Romania, and after the end of the war, to Palestine. 33 years later, Ben Gershom, the Holocaust survivor, published another book, Esel des Propheten, eine Kulturgeschichte des jüdischen Humors. The Donkey of the Prophet, a cultural history of Jewish humor. His longest chapter dealt with laughing during the Shoah, laughing after the Shoah. A shorter chapter, only 12 pages long, was dedicated to humor in Israel. The closing remarks of this chapter, about a page long, concern the Israeli author Ephraim Kishon, who was born Ferenc Hoffman, later Ferenc Kishon, another Holocaust survivor, a Hungarian Jew from Budapest, who was 2 years younger than Ben Gershom König. Ben Gershom does not make a secret of his non-benevolent opinion of Kishon's quality as a satirist and humorist. He criticizes Kishons schablonhafte Figuren, einfällige Stereotypen, that is, the one-dimensional stereotypes, and doesn't seem to enjoy Kishon's humor at all. It is especially Kishon's enormous popularity and success in Germany that displeased German native speaker Ben Gershom. For him, Kishon's humoristic oeuvre was especially thankfully received by the Germans. Dankbar aufgenommen, besonders in Deutschland, because they enjoyed Kishon's ridicule, this is his opinion, Kishon's ridicule of the childhood diseases of the young state of Israel, while at the same time leaving the memory of the Shoah out of bounds. He, Ben Gershom, wondered why Kishon did not provide his readers with an autobiography in which this omission of the Holocaust is explained. It is time to remind you, those who are here, that I am a historian, not a literary scholar. It is not my intention, of course, to pass judgment about the literary quality of Kishon, only to find an answer to the question of Kishon's relevance for post-Holocaust German-Jewish, German-Israeli relations. It is the broader framework that interests me, the effects of Shoah memory, Shoah utkuma, Shoah and the foundation of Israel, the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews. It seemed that Ben Gershom, though aware of Yaron London's biographical dialogue with Kishon, in which Kishon's fate during the Shoah is discussed at length, managed to ignore its importance as an answer to the second part of his question, namely, as to the lack of reference to the Shoah in Kishon's popular books for the German public. Yaron London, who is well known in Israel, Yaron London's book appeared both in Hebrew and in German. 7 years before the Prophet's Donkey of Ben Gershom was published and should have been consulted systematically. There, Kishon not only talked extensively about his life and experience under the rule of Hungarian fascists and Nazi Germany, but also about the role this past played in his relations to post-war Germany and his German readers. What Ben Gershom could not ignore, after all, was Kishon's book, Mein Kampf, My Com, which he wrote in early 1945, when in hiding, but published only in the year 1997, 3 years before Ben Gershom's book appeared. This satirical novel practically described a fascist movement, was an allegorical description of the rise of National Socialism. In Mein Kampf, the discriminated and persecuted minority group is that of the bald-headed males. Indeed, it took Kishon half a century to publish this book. because he was afraid of being misunderstood. According to Kishon himself, the idea behind the book was to show that, quote, the chimneys of the crematories were not the essence of National Socialism. The city of Dresden, he explained, decreed the Jews deposit their combs and hairbrushes with the local police station. I wrote my book about these combs, says Ephraim Kishon. Kishon's idea about the nature of the National Socialism was thus most accurate from the point of view of the historian, of the modern historian, but at the same time, too subtle if used in a context of satirical writing. For Ben Gershom, Mein Kampf is no more than yet another proof that, you quoted it, nach Auschwitz konnte Satire nur noch verharmlosend wirken. After Auschwitz, satire could only belittle the greatest of crimes. But with this very conclusion, Ben Gershon's complaint about Kishon's neglect of the Shoah in his popular publications loses its validity. The alleged divide between satire and Shoah memory could not be, therefore, used as an argument against Kishon. We are also allowed to ask why Ben Gershom, in his long chapter about laughing after the Shoah, did refer to David Grossman, to Yoram Kaniuk, both Israelis, but not to Kishon. On our part, we may show later, when looking into the London Kishon biographical dialogue, and especially when reading Kishon's writings, how he himself provides us with a reasonable way out of this accusation. Moreover, we'll pay attention to some examples where Kishon did refer to the role of the Shoah in his satirical articles. But let me start with some biographical details before we return to the question raised by Ben Gershon. Ephraim Kishon is, no doubt, the most successful Israeli author when it comes to both the number of his books sold and to the international outreach of the films he produced and directed. Kishon's German success story, he sold more copies than any other foreign author in Germany, began in the year 1953, when a German translation made by Franz Kafka's friend Max Brod, a translation of his satirical drama, his name precedes him. In German, it was called Die große Protektion, in Hebrew, Shmo holech lefanav. When that appeared, this was the first in an endless series of books, mainly collections of humourists, that found their way to the bookshelves of the average German reader. His books, Kishon's books, starting with Look Back, Mrs. Lot, became bestsellers, more successful in German-speaking Central Europe than in any other country, including Israel, where the original Hebrew text appeared. In 1976, Kishon won the DTV Golden Paperback Prize for 1 million copies of Look Back, Mrs. Lot, sold in Germany. He got the Verdienstkreuz Erster Klasse in the year 1993, and in 2001, he won the Münchhausen Prize, by the way, 4 years before the popular Dutch entertainer Rudi Carrell. On German stages, Haktubah, the marriage contract, became a commercial success too, and his films, especially Blaumilchkanal, in English, The Big Dig, from the year 1969, won him enormous popularity among theater and movie audience. Kishon was a Holocaust survivor, then an Ole, new immigrant who emigrated from Hungary to Israel in the year 1949. His literary talent was discovered already in Hungary, and as he moved to Israel, he was stubborn enough to learn Hebrew and become a master of this language. His first humourists were translated by Avigdor Hameiri, another important Israeli author of Hungarian origin, into Hebrew. Then Ezriel Karlebach, the editor of the most popular Israeli newspaper, Ma'ariv, discovered Kishon and signed him in for a daily column called Chad Gadya, Young Goat. Already his second book, that appeared in 1952, a collection of Chad Gadyas, was written in his very original and inventive Hebrew, illustrated, by the way, by Kishon himself. Some of his puns entered since the modern Hebrew dictionary. He wrote comedies and sketches, was a film director, even an Oscar candidate, and became an Israeli celebrity. Though commercially extremely successful, Kishon suffered from an inferiority complex. To start with literary critics and academia, etc., humoristic writings are less appreciated than real, serious literature. And compared to tragedies, comedies are usually considered lightweight. Indeed, one plausible explanation for Kishon's huge success in Germany was the fact that comedies were a rarity in German repertoire and humor a weak point in German character and tradition. But this German deficiency did not lead German critics to change their mind either about the value of humoristic writing in general, nor about Kishon's literary product. Kishon started quite early complaining about this underestimation, even disrespect, expressed by representatives of the literary profession. His frustration only grew over time. He was especially sensitive to the disrespectful criticism in Israel, his country, and in Germany, where he was so successful and popular. In short, Ben Gershom was not alone in his low esteem of Kishon's quality as a writer and humorist. Marcel Reich-Ranitzky, the high priest of German literary criticism, also a Holocaust survivor, did not miss a chance to express his low opinion of Kishon. He thus represented a general attitude of the Guild of Literary Critics who considered Kishon, just to quote a verdict in a recently published article, an author for the German petit bourgeois lacking special literary quality. There is one obvious weakness in much of this German criticism and academic debate concerning Kishon. Too often, the discrepancy between the Hebrew original and the German product is ignored or forgotten. Kishon was very lucky to get Friedrich Thorberg as a translator of his just a moment. Well, he was lucky to get Friedrich Thorberg as a translator of his books into German language. Thorberg, who was 16 years older than Kishon, was also a Jew from the KUK monarchy, a refugee of the Third Reich who fled to America but returned to Austria after the war. In his book, Für alle Fälle, which was published in the year 1990, Kishon allows himself the following remark, quote, "Good translators do not really exist. In order to keep up with the original, the translator must be as talented as the author." But if one is so talented, why should he waste his time doing translations? When this maxim was printed, Torberg was already dead for more than 10 years, when not every reader could necessarily understand the joke. Torberg was indeed an established and respected author when he accepted the role of Kishon's translator. He did it not only because he desperately needed money, but because he was convinced of Kishon's literary quality. Therefore, at least, those who were so enthusiastic about Torberg's books, like Die Mannschaft or Die Tante Jolesch oder Der Untergang des Abendlandes in Anekdoten, which appeared in 1975, should have accepted also Torberg's judgment of Kishon's quality as a writer. What is more, Torberg is well remembered for his attack against Salzia Landsmann in the year 1961, a Jewess from Galicia who lived in Switzerland, author of the book Der jüdische Witz, the Jewish wit, since he believed this book, Landsmann book, to be promoting anti-Semitic images and stereotypes still shared by many Germans. The same accusation was directed by Reich-Ranitzky against Kishon, whose German translation he read. The neutral observer might wonder, was Torberg blind to a flaw in Kishon's style that he himself criticized in the case of Landmann? Reich-Ranitzky not only accused Kishon of disseminating anti-Semitic prejudice, he even believed that Kishon's success with the German-speaking readers was the direct outcome of the characters he created, aided by Torberg's translation, which confirmed the readers' preconceived ideas about the Jews. This is indeed a question we have to deal with. Does the key to Kishon's success in post-Holocaust Germany lie in his use of anti-Semitic stereotypes still prevalent in German bourgeois society? Or was it the average German enthusiastic, or was the average German enthusiastic about Kishon stories only because they provided him with an alibi? After all, Kishon, the Jew, made a mockery of the Jews. And if a Jew portrays such characters, they allegedly thought to themselves, why shouldn't we applaud him? How could it happen passing through the filter of Torberg's translation? This is my question. The same Torberg who, as mentioned above, was aware of this very kind of danger when he attacked Landmann. This question could be answered only after first comparing the translated version to the Hebrew original. Is Reich-Ranitzky's criticism justified? And if so, who is more to be blamed, Kishon himself or Torberg? After comparing the Hebrew original to the German translation, it seems to me that Torberg, maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, indeed added via his translation a certain incentive for people whose hidden motive might be the lust for the image of the ridiculous stereotypical diaspora Jew. But even this does not amount to the quantum leap toward an anti-Semitic stereotype, especially since the original Hebrew text does not provide dramatis personae that could be identified with anti-Semitic images. Let me refer to some examples in the text itself. where the translation, not the original, may be understood as potentially serving hidden anti-Semitic prejudices. First of all, first names used in this text. Sometimes the storyteller, sometimes his partner, is called Yosale or Moshe, which help create the association to the Yiddish-speaking diaspora Jew. Another example, the German version, also the other translated versions, include introductions that explain the setting with which the non-Israeli is unfamiliar. There one finds descriptions, explanations, and words like the Yiddish word tzores that might have triggered association of the diaspora, mainly of the East European Jew. The chapter, Ich bin Zeuge, I am witness, in the book Look Back, Mrs. Lot, provides us with a good example. In the original Hebrew version, the main figure is called Yosef, very Hebrew, very Israeli. In the German version, he is called Yankel. For German readers who were brought up before 1945, this name contains a certain pejorative flavor, maybe. In order to introduce the reader to the situation described in the humourist, in which Yosef, alias Yankel, plays a decisive role, a paragraph was inserted beginning with the sentence, I quote, "Another special trait of the Jews is their attachment to tradition." The German reader may be intrigued by this introduction because a Jew is introducing him to the secrets of Jewish life. But this, I hope you agree, does not amount to an anti-Semitic insinuation. On the whole, Kishon's readers are confronted with universal everyday situations that in this case happen in the Jewish state of Israel. The universal human message gets an exotic flair coming from the Middle East. Kishon explained Yaron London that since he started his career as an author, already when he wrote Mein Kampf, he looked for the general pattern of human behavior. Scenes describing Kishon, his wife, are different from scenes with Mr. Vendriner and his wife in Tucholsky's stories. Only they take place in Israel, Kishon's country. It is this melange of universal and exotic that attracted the interest of Kishon's readers in Germany, in Austria, Hungary, and the USA. The alleged anti-Semitic stereotypes are marginal, if at all. Here comes an additional amusing twist, which reminds us of the original Chad Gadya story from the Pesach Haggadah. Torberg, as we have seen, attacked Landmann. Reich-Ranitzky attacked Torberg's protege Kishon, in both cases, as we have seen, for allegedly helping anti-Semitic approaches or anti-Semites. But Kishon, in his turn, attacked yet another Jew for doing exactly the same. He attacked Woody Allen. I quote, "Woody Allen makes me angry." Woody Allen owes much of his success to the fact that he presented to the world the image of a Jew that Goyim like to see, small, ugly, neurotic, and whining. End of quotation. This image is, according to Kishon, the sales promoter of Woody Allen and Philip Roth. The funny thing about this Chad Gadya is that all are aware of the potential danger created by such literary works, but pin the blame on somebody else for turning this potential danger into a real one. Thorberg and Kishon were aware of this danger in real time and warded off possible accusation directed at them. In Look Back, Mrs. Lot, the story Justice for Dr. Parzuf, which is funny for Israeli, starts with a statement, I quote, "It is about time for me, Kishon, to say also something positive about the Jews. Otherwise, I'll be blamed for being an anti-Semite." So he was aware of this situation. Here, a further observation is needed. Being sensitive to Jewish stereotypes is more characteristic of European Jews, whereas in the multi-ethnic United States, at least since World War II, Woody Allen or Philip Roth or others could relate to Jewish characteristics without running the risk of spreading anti-Semitism, of being accused of doing so. Moreover, even in Germany, authors and film producers could do the same now, half a century and more after the Shoah. The film Alles auf Zucker, directed by Danny Levy, unthinkable in Weimar times, may serve as a good example. Yaron London, the interviewer of Kishon, confronted him directly on this very question. You must be aware of the fact that similar accusations are directed at you in the German-speaking countries. They like Ephraim Kishon because he presents us with a miserable, petit bourgeois, always restless Jew, end of quote. Kishon's answer did not relate to the stereotypes themselves, but to the aim of his endeavor. Quote, the real question is whether I made Israelis more sympathetic to my foreign readers or not. Well, millions of Europeans learned to love Israel through me, Kishon. Millions of German tourists came to Israel after reading my books. They did not come in order to see the miserable and ridiculous Jew, but the humane and sympathetic Israeli. End of quote. This is the key to the answer and the key to the understanding of the German-Jewish complex, the new symbiosis in the eyes of Kishon, and the controversy over Kishon and anti-Semitism. It is Israel that matters, not the Jew, the diaspora, because it is the sole representative, he, the Israeli, of Judaism. We will later elaborate on this point. Just to refresh the memory of those who do not take a daily portion of Kishon like myself, Kishon, the satiricon, had an eye for social problems, which made him so popular in his own country, Israel, mainly in the first 20 years of his literary career. Let's take the comedies as an example. We already mentioned Shmo Holech Lefanav, his name preceded him, which describes the corrupting effect of protectia, that is nepotism, in Israel within the context of Olim absorption. There is no problem to effectively relocate the story in a German or another ambience or surrounding. The same goes for Haktubah, the marriage contract, which takes place in, or where the kibbutz plays a decisive role, or in Blaumil's Canal, about the madman who turns Tel Aviv into a Israeli Venice that became Kishon's best-known film. In Germany, his cultural flagship. It is the social phenomenon that is more relevant than the Israeli or Jewish mise-en-scène. Kishon had an eye for the basic problems of Israeli society, which made him relevant in Israel, but at the same time, also abroad. The comedy Black on White, Shachor al Gabei Lavan, about the tension between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim in Israel, a tension that did not recede even until today, looks in retrospective like a strike of genius. The fact that he relates to Jewish Israeli plumbers, writers, soldiers, etc., adds, as I said, a special local flavor to the situation he described or criticized. But the reader, the moviegoer, the theater audience reacted in Germany or in any other place to the human situation, marginalizing the fact that the dramatis personae were Jews or Israelis. As I said before, this universal perspective was Kishon's aim, starting already with Mein Kampf. Not to forget, the books which appeared in Hebrew and later translated into other languages went through a process of selection. Not every Chad Gadya column that appeared in the newspaper seemed worth entering a book to be preserved for eternity. The next collective step or selective step took place when the decision which Chad Gadya to translate was taken, not only because readers outside Israel were unfamiliar with phenomena or internal Israeli developments and may therefore misunderstand the comic situation. The introduction we already mentioned addressed the non-Israeli readers, introducing some new elements to the humoresque that were absent in the Hebrew original, but necessary for the reader to better understand what he is supposed to laugh about. Another relevant comparison will help answer our question. Kishon was not the only Israeli who published in post-war Germany and not the only humorist either. Here, Moshe Yaakov ben Gavriel, another good Israeli name, comes to my mind. Born in Vienna in the year 1891 as Eugen Höflich, he made Aliyah already when Kishon was only 3 years old. He is best known for the novel Das Haus in der Grafengasse about Nazis' takeover of Czechoslovakia in 1938. The novel turned in 1965 into a successful movie. This is why we know about it, directed by no less than Kurt Hoffmann. A story about the fate of Jews under the Third Reich. After World War II, Ben Gavriel, the same Ben Gavriel, began a second career as a Israeli citizen, as a novelist and humorist in Germany. Unlike Kishon, he wrote in German for the Germans and did not need a translator. But like Kishon, Thorberg, and Ben Gershom, or Hameire for that matter, he was a product of the KUK monarchy of Austria-Hungary. He became quite well known in Germany, but not as successful as Kishon. 60,000 copies of a book of his was the maximum. Well received, even though his stories describe life in Palestine. To give an example, Kumsitz, Geschichten aus der Wüste, that appeared in the year 1956. Obviously, there was a demand for literature from Israel, but publication policy, etc., played the role in deciding upon success or failure. Ben Gavriel was displeased with the applause for young Kishon, who was celebrated by the media as the first Israeli humorist when Look Back, Mrs. Lot appeared in Germany. Ben Gavriel attacked Kishon sharply, not for creating anti-Semitic characters, for following a non-Israeli tradition in humor, with no real authentic Israeli background, so he believed. Bearing in mind Kishon's role in Israeli humor since the 50s, from the comedy skits of Batzali Yarok, Green Onion, and Hagashash HaChiver, to the movies Salah Shabati and Policeman Azulai, Ben Gabriel's harsh criticism remains no more than the expression of envy and a and a reaction to Kishon's entry into Germany's literary pantheon. Ben Gabriel's Traktate über ganz gewöhnliche Dinge, which appeared in the year 1962, could not compete with Kishon's popular Mrs. Lot. Not only Ben Gabriel looked for an explanation. The hiatus between Kishon's popular success and the attitude of literary critics only grew over time. Kishon himself commented more than once, I quote, "The three main preconditions for becoming a nominee for a Nobel Prize in literature are: 1, obvious senility; 2, lack of commercial success; and 3, absolutely humorless." Indeed, humor is considered by critics an inferior genre. Humorists do not get Nobel Prizes, Kishon told London, because according to the jurors, what is funny is no literature. Bad humorists, those who do not raise even the shadow of a smile on the face of their reader, have better chance to get the Nobel. End of quote. Kishon's frustration did not concern only the unachievable Nobel Prize in literature. He felt himself underestimated compared to other living famous Jewish or Israeli authors, for instance, Philip Roth or Amos Oz. Indeed, Kishon got little attention or appreciation in research done about Jewish or Hebrew literature. And those who mentioned Kishon usually passed a rather unfavorable judgment about him. This changed, as he himself prophesied, only after he died in the year 2005. Some scholarly work emerged after all, with special attention paid to his German success. 6 years ago, an article about Ephraim Kishon's German triumph appeared in a volume about Jewish humor in Oxford. Another article appeared 3 years ago, which dealt with Kishon's reaction to the 6 Days War in German language, in a German language scientific journal published by the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And 2 years ago, an article called Ephraim Kishon für Deutsche, der israelische Autor und Satiriker im Literaturbetrieb der Bundesrepublik, appeared in a journal published by the ZZF in Potsdam, here in Germany. This article reached a devastating conclusion, and I quote, "The question about the relationship between Jewish wit of the diaspora and Israeli humor was responsible for locating Kishon today and was responsible for the image of the author as entertainment author of lesser quality. It is not only the problem Kishon always talked about, being unable to win Nobel Prize or the Israel Prize, which he eventually won, but also the comparison to classical Jewish humorists that helped classify Kishon as a second-rate humorist. Second-rate compared, for instance, to Sholem Aleichem or Kurt Tucholsky. This again was different from the first reactions to Kishon's satirical book in the United States. There he was favorably compared not only to Sholem Aleichem, but even to Mark Twain. Here in Europe, Kishon's frustration was justified. Jewish diaspora humor a la Droyanov or Sholem Aleichem was idealized. This this is my contention, mainly because of the bad conscience of both post-Holocaust Jews and non-Jews, but also because these readers preferred the very image of the Jew illustrated by East European Jewish authors, an image that indeed fitted into anti-Semitic prejudices. Kishon intentionally refrained from this kind of humor just because he wanted to avoid this pitfall. For this, he thought he should be praised, not criticized. It is time to return to the question of Kishon's alleged blotting out of his own experience during the Shoah and his understanding of the role of the Shoah memory in the interaction between himself and the German public. As mentioned above, the Shoah played a central role in the biographic dialogue of 1993. The interrelation between him and the Gestapo, so he said, was much more important for him than the relations to his own father. As said before, his experience as a Jew in Hungary was most traumatic. He survived only by chance, knew exactly how terrible Jewish life under Nazi rule was. But above all, he was convinced that anti-Semitism alone brought Hitler to power and motivated the Europeans during this period. For the true reader of Kishon, there is no doubt that he did not ignore the Shoah as a topic, even in his satirical writings, in Hebrew anyway, knowing, however, that a German translation may miss the point. Kishon possessed a motorcycle, which he called, because of its black color, the color of the SS, Dr. Kurt Kaltenbrunner. Eichmann's trial motivated Kishon to write several satirical Chad-Gadial columns about Eichmann's effort to evade telling the truth while testifying. Already the Kastner trial in the 50s caused Kishon to comment on what happened in Budapest during the war. He did not join the onslaught of people around Malkiel Grünwald against Kastner. But maybe the best way to understand his rather inconsistent handling of the Holocaust in his satire, which motivated Ben Gershom and others to attack him, was supplied by an article written in the early 60s by Kishon called Senseless, En Higayon. There he discussed his instinctive loathing for the German movies that became very popular in Israel during the 50s. Those who know Sissi and the like. It is a dialogue in which Kishon answers questions like, do you know that Herzl made his speeches in German? Do you admit that West Germany supports us in the international arena? Is it possible to hate a whole nation forever? But when it came to the question of watching German movies, Kishon returned to his original statement, I can't stand them. The answer to the next question, what about your logic, was simple, burned in Auschwitz. In March '65, he published a Chad-Gadia in Hebrew titled The Conscience. There he criticized Germany for waiting so long to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. He described the dormant German conscience that did nothing to change the situation. The punchline came. The sleeping conscience is informed about Ulbricht's visit to Nasser in Egypt. Then I quote, the conscience jumped out of the bed instantly. Israel, it cried, here I come. In short, the Holocaust and his personal experience were always present. If relevant, also in his satire, but as a humorist, tried to avoid misunderstandings and bagatellization, especially when translated into German. The Holocaust is therefore his memory companion with a special effect in Germany, an effect he mentioned again and again. Not long before his 80th birthday, when he was asked by a German interviewer, how does it feel being especially popular in Germany? His answer was, I am a Holocaust survivor. Therefore, I feel special satisfaction when the grandchildren of my hangman like my literary products written originally in Hebrew. And I am rather fond of these young people, end of quote. 10 years earlier, he said, quote, today I am the favorite author of the perpetrators' offsprings. This is my great and real revenge. This will drive Goering mad in hell. From the point of view of Kishon, the answer to Ben Gershom's query is therefore making Germans read satirical columns written by an Israeli Holocaust survivor is the best contribution to German Vergangenheitsbewältigung. As we have learned above, Kishon's main aim in Germany more than elsewhere was to support Israel's case. This was the idea already when his readers belonged to the generation of the perpetrators, not the offspring. It is Israel that matters, he said, not the diaspora Jews. To achieve this aim, he used mainly the indirect approach. His political messages were anti-communist, anti-Arab, rather acceptable for the West German, Austrian, or Swiss readers, but above all, pro-Israeli. Here, a further paradox is worth mentioning. A student of mine, Jonathan Kaplan, called my attention to an anti-communist Kishon, or to the success of anti-communist Kishon in the DDR, in Eastern Germany. Helmut Kastan translation of the Heiratsurkunde, of the marriage contract, became a theatrical success in the DDR and made a movie in 1964 with the famous East German Jewish actress Steffi Spira. Kishon's pro-Israeli propaganda was thus mostly indirect. Israel's international problems did not take up much space in his satirical writing. But this statement is valid for Kishon's publications before 1967, before the 6 Days War. But since then, the political Kishon came with full fury to the fore in Israel, but also in his translated book to German, Wie unfair David, or Pardon, wir haben gewonnen, pardon, we won the war. This politicization of his writings, and all the more so his open support for Israel's nationalistic policy, were met now with suspicion or even dissatisfaction. Already in the year 1980, Kishon admitted that his publisher warned him that if he's going to write a Kishon non-book, or a book which is non-Kishon, un-Kishon, he will lose his public. So Kishon, who did not want to lose his German audience, removed most of his open political statements from the published collections to TV interviews in Germany or other public debates. I open my presentation, which I'm going to close very soon, with Ben Gershom's remark about Kishon serving the hidden anti-Semitic stereotypes. Kishon indeed believed that anti-Semitism did not disappear after World War II. On the contrary, but the anti-Semitism he fought against was a new mutation. And I quote, wer Israel urteilt, ist Antisemit. Whoever condemns Israel is an anti-Semite by definition. Or another quote, anti-Israel and anti-Semitism are one and the same for me, he told to Yaron London. And when asked if there is really no room for criticism of Israel, Kishon answered, maybe there is, but not for them, that is, for Germans. They are not allowed to do so. The responsibility for the crimes committed forbid criticism against Israel, absolutely. And he went even further. And the next statement surprises even more. People don't understand that the establishment of the Jewish state invigorated anti-Semitism immensely. Now, Theodor Herzl's point of departure was that moving Jews to their own land, to Palestine or somewhere else, will help solve the problem of anti-Semitism, at least diminish the power of this prejudice. If Kishon is right, and anti-Semitism flourishes because of the existence of Israel, the only conclusion must be either that he, Kishon himself, is not a true Zionist, or else that Zionism has failed. Interestingly enough, Kishon's first satirical collection, Look Back at the Lot, begins with the following introductory statement. This book is a bold and innovating experiment. It will try to show a picture of the state of Israel without overloading it with Zionism. Probably this meant back in the late 50s that he wanted to avoid ideology and hymns of praise for Israel. But this statement can be interpreted also in a different way. Since Zionism accepted many components of the anti-Semitic prejudice, Kishon wanted to avoid these elements in his satirical work in Germany. Instead, he shifted the discussion about anti-Semitism from what we call now classical anti-Semitism, which is a way was shared by Zionism, to the so-called Israel-related anti-Semitism. The confession he made is revealing. We Israelis love anti-Semitism. Its sheer existence provides us with the justification for life in our own land. This shift of Kishon's focus concerning the Jewish question was radical, but in retrospective, successful. His frustration over the wave of leftist support for the Arabs and the Palestinians, and especially vis-a-vis criticism of Israel, a frustration he expressed time and again, turned out in retrospective to be groundless. Today, at the latest since the Bundestag passed the decision concerning the BDS movement in May 2019, the fight against anti-Semitism in Germany concentrates on criticism against Israel, what they call Israel critique. The political class in Germany, for its part, is always on the alert to ward off any attempt to criticize Israel. Maybe Herzl failed, but Kishon won his war. The price paid for was that Kishon's name is now fading out, his satirical writings marginalized, but official and medial Germany fully accept his slogan. Criticism against Israel is anti-Semitism, is anathema. Neither Ben Gershom nor other could complain about Kishon's contribution to this present attitude of Germany toward the Jewish state called Israel. Since Kishon's main aims were, 1, get revenge from the generation of the perpetrators, and 2, combined with it is Israel that matters to compensate for anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, he was successful in both during his lifetime and posthumously. And thus, he personifies a new German-Jewish-Israeli symbiosis concerning the attitude toward anti-Semitism and the Shoah. Moreover, he even may be presented as one of the chief contributors to this symbiosis and thus to the present official status of Israel as untouchable. To be honest, I prefer the pre-67 Kishon in Israel as well as in Germany. Thank you very much for listening. It became longer than I thought it'd be, but I hope we'll have enough time now to discuss.
Well, thank you very much, Moshe, for this wonderful talk that very much points out how important popular culture is and how multi-layered and political it is. Even though a humorist may not earn a Nobel Prize, we have certainly seen that there are so many different political, historical, and societal layers to the work of Ephraim Kishon. And I could have listened to you for another 2 hours, but of course we want to give some space to our guests tonight to ask questions. And the way that we're going to do that is I would kindly ask everyone who wants to ask a question about the talk to add their name into the chat, and we will call upon you in order and unmute you so you can put your question out into the forum, and Moshe can then answer it. So we have got the first question from Daniel Wildman. So Clara, could you see to unmuting Daniel so he can ask his question?
Okay, good evening everybody, and Erev Tov, and Moshe, and also hello to the Lehrbeck Institute, my old institute. My question for Moshe might be a bit complicated. I think the key is really what you mentioned before. It's Israel that matters. I think this really comes to the core of Ephraim Kishon, and especially when you look at his early work before 67, like for example his, how shall we call it, the Bureka films, you see also he's extremely political. My feeling is that somehow this got lost in the German translations. And I'm not quite sure really what he was representing within the German-speaking world. I think one needs also to distinguish between two kind of audiences. At least this is my experience when I look at his reception, for example, in Switzerland. From a Jewish point of view, Swiss, German Jewish point of view, he seems to have been some kind of a hero, a voice, a Sprachrohr, who represents something they could be proud of. So they saw him as an Israeli. But I'm not quite sure how the Gentile, non-Jewish audience, how they received him. Did they see him as a Jew, or did they see him as an Israeli? From a Jewish point of view, he was clearly an Israeli, but there was also one incident whether they forgot about him being Israeli and they saw him as a Jew. This was a very famous incident, a big kind of debate at the end of his career when he was reading from his books on Erev Yom Kippur. From an Israeli point of view, this doesn't matter, Erev Yom Kippur, right? But within a German-speaking surrounding Switzerland, it was a big scandal. Then suddenly he became Jewish again. But mainly from a Jewish point of view, he always was an Israeli. So my question is, how would you argue was he seen by a German-speaking Gentile audience, Israeli or Jewish? This makes a difference, I would say.
The intention of Kishon is very clear. He wanted to speak for the Israelis and not for the Jews.
That's clear to me, but how was he seen? You know, did the German make this difference?
As I said, this was his intention. We try to find out what the motivation was of the average German when he read the book or read the stories of Ephraim Kishon. We don't have any public opinion polls or any instruments in order to find out. I assume this is only as an assumption.
Mhm.
It was not the Jew, but it was the Israeli or the Hungarian or
Mhm.
Central European who was received by the audience. But there again, we have to think about the dynamics within Kishon's own history and the dynamics of the history of the state of Israel. Israel presented itself as some kind of a contrapunct to Judaism in the start. And this changed after 67 and more 77. Now, again, I assume that today it is very complicated or even impossible to make a differentiation between a Jewish and an Israeli character, because Israel presents itself as a Jewish state based on all ingredients of being Jewish. So over time, maybe my impression about the average reader of the 50s and the 60s must change, and the readers of the 70s, 80s, or the readers of the 21st century might confuse Jewishness with Israeli or belonging to Israel. And from that point on, of course, the accusation against Kishon that what he is presenting is, let's say, the ugly Jew, may not be groundless. But these are all assumptions that have to be proven or disproven by a real instrument in the hand of the social scientists. So I leave it to them to give me the answer.
And I hope we will find some PhD students to maybe inquire into that deeper, because that would have been exactly one of the questions that I would have had personally. The next question will come from Kay Schiller.
Yeah, thank you very much for this paper. I liked it a lot. It's actually Kai Schiller, but it's not a problem. I'm really, it's kind of related to what Daniel asked, and this is about how does this actually work, this identification with Israel that's happening in German society through reading Kishon, and to what extent is this kind of linked to sort of de-Jewifying Kishon and really dislodging his Israeli portrayals of Israeli society from portrayals of Jewish society. And so it's actually linked to the question that Daniel asked, how is he actually perceived by the German public in the early 1960s? That would be sort of a continuation of that question. And linked to this is the question to what extent he's also actually playing into a Cold War dynamic in a certain way. You mentioned Nasser visiting Egypt and the importance that actually had for him in his view, and in the sense that West Germany had to support Israel as a result of that, even if perhaps it didn't want to. And that also links to the issue of to what extent he was really very much connected to a sort of conservative establishment in Germany, as represented by whatever his publisher, Langenmüller, or also his good connections to Axel Springer. Sorry, there's 3 questions now, but feel free to answer only one of them.
Well, as to the first question, I might again say, without an instrument to find out, we are talking about impressions.
Uh-huh.
And one thing we can take for sure, that the dividing line between the Sabra and the Jew of the diaspora, which was basically the idea behind Zionism, this dividing line was faded out in the last 50 years. So you can't expect the reader who reads about Israel, even if the intention was to talk about Israelis and not about Jews, that he make or find the difference between them. You find the German newspaper or the German media in general doing the same. If you look for a type which should be Israeli, you take a type or you use a type which is basically known from what you know about the Jews. He had either the right nose or the kippah, the yarmulke, or some sign that tells you, well, Israel is more or less identical with Jews since it calls itself the Jewish state. So what Kishon tried to achieve could not be achieved over the time. As to the second question, of course, Kishon was a part of the Cold War. He was brought up in the Cold War. He began his career in Hungary as a journalist. He became a really radical anti-communist. If you read what he wrote in the 50s already, it's clear. His aim is to fight effectively communism and show how ridiculous and also unbearable communism is, based on his experience in Hungary, based on what everybody could read about in the newspapers. This was something that was typical of Ephraim Kishon until the end of the Cold War. After the end of the Cold War, when the enemy from without disappeared, he could go on like many on the conservative side in fighting the same enemies from within. So you fight socialism, you fight the left, you fight those who criticize Israel in Israeli society. And this is exactly why I made this remark at the end. As somebody who is at least called leftist in Israel, you can't agree with Ephraim Kishon, and especially not when he directs all his sarcasm against Israeli society and against the left wing within Israeli society. When he began to support the religious Israelis going with kippot as the backbone of Israeli nation living in Israel, we knew that he went one bridge too far. It was too late for us. But everything he did in this direction is something which a good leftist Israeli can't accept. This is why many of my colleagues or friends who liked Kishon in the past are distancing themselves from him. For me, it's very difficult. My answer is, of course, I see Ephraim Kishon. Ephraim Kishon before 67, who is only conservative, only nationalist, but a good observer of the deficiencies of society. And Kishon after 67, a man who is in favor of great Israel, Israel Shlema, and in favor of everything that developed on the right wing of Israeli politics.
Okay, we have one question that I have to read out because Sam Lisman doesn't have a microphone, and he would like to know whether, from the perspective of an American English reader, which of the works of Ephraim Kishon hold up the best? So which is the first book he should read?
The first book that he should read is Look Back, Mrs. Lot. It is His first one translated into English. There you get a notion of what he was talking about, what you have to learn about Israel of the 50s. And my best advice is, of course, to learn Hebrew and read his book called Elef Gadia Begadia, his first book, which appeared in exactly 70 years ago. I think there you get a glimpse into the real essence of what he was writing about, an essence of what good criticism of the society may lead to.
Thank you, Moshe. Now it is Roger Macy, please.
Hi, yes, thank you. This is a question from complete ignorance, and to take us right back. Of Kishon's fiction, was it all set in his present day in Israel, and none of it of a Jewish life of which he must have had experience of before 1945?
What is so special about Kishon is that he was brought up in an assimilated family, so his Jewish experience, as we understand it now, Jewish rights and belonging to the Jewish community, religious community, was not his story. His Jewish experience before coming to Israel was divided into two. First of all, as a Jew under Nazi rule or under the rule of the Italian Hungarian fascists. So he was discriminated as a Jew. That was his experience, and he wrote about it. As I said, not too much, but he inserted it into his writings. And the other part was living as a Jew in a communist regime. Again, discriminated, but in another way. So these memories of being a Jew in the diaspora took place in what he wrote when in Israel, but he pinpointed mainly on Israeli society because he knew those who read his stories are Israelis, and what he was interested in mainly was the Sabra, the Israeli-born reader, like myself. And for them, all stories about the time in Hungary before 1945 were not really, let's say, attractive enough. We wanted, and I say we, the Sabres, we wanted to read Kishon because he had a sharp eye for what our society was deficient in. And this is why nearly everything he wrote, it was purely about Israeli society, about the relations between Jews and Arabs, between Mizrahim and Ashkenazi, the question of discrimination within Israeli society, militarism and the criticism of militarism, everything was there, but it was purely Sabra, it was purely Israeli.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to say thank you now. Thank you, Moshe, for your fascinating talk and for the interesting responses to all the questions. And I would also like to thank the German Historical Institute and the entire team there for their support. And of course, my colleagues, Karina and Clara, who have worked with me on this evening with feverish intensity in the past weeks. And of course, thank you to you all, to our guests for joining us tonight. Before we leave, let me just extend a short invitation to our next and final lecture from the series on popular culture and Jews, which will also take place online on the 17th of November in 2022 at 6:30. And that time that will be Tobias Ebrecht-Harden talking about meeting our ultra-Orthodox other on Netflix. So thanks again. Thanks for joining us. And we hope you enjoyed this event. And I wish everybody a very nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening and for your patience.